I'm Rick from Cartage Classic Cars. On this video, we're going to talk about doors on the 70 Nova and what we're going to be installing. So right here, we have our 70 Nova. If you haven't seen it, go back and watch previous videos. You'll see most of the metal on this car is brand new. So we are going to go ahead and put aftermarket doors on the car. With the owner, when this car came to us and when he got the car basically out of a junkyard, it didn't come with doors. So right now the doors were missing, and we are going to put these aftermarket parts. The doors cover 68 to 72. If you know anything about the Novas, they have different windows and stuff for the earlier models and everything else, but we're not too concerned with that. What we're going to talk today and what I'm worried about here are hinges. So 68 to mid-year 70, all the Novas had bolt-on hinges. So that would be the Chevy 2 and then the sub-model Nova. So the Nova from 70 to 72 had weld-on hinges. Where that poses a problem for us is the aftermarket doors that we're buying all have bolt-on hinges. There's a couple things we can do to go about doing this. One, we did buy a set of aftermarket bolt-on hinges. So a couple options you have is cut apart the hinges here. I mean, we don't have the original door, so we don't have the other set of hinges. Buy a bushing kit and rebuild the half of the hinge onto the hinge on the car. The reason I'm not gonna do that is, one, I don't know how good these hinges fit. I've never seen the doors on the car. We put everything else on the car, and the owner and I are talking about really gapping this car out and making it show quality. We're talking better than factory. I don't believe these weld-on hinges, and even if we put half of this hinge on there, what's to say these aren't bent? I mean, you could see the pins are in super rough shape. This car, like I said, it's been sitting around. So we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna do it. This could be a first for me, but we're gonna convert these hinges to a bolt-on set. I'm gonna basically cut off these hinges. We're gonna make a backing plate, and we're gonna get them about centered where they were, and we're gonna put the bolt-on hinges. What this is gonna allow us to do, since the quarter panels are just screwed in, you could see the screws there, we can still move stuff on this car. We're gonna put the front end on the car before we weld on the back end. We're gonna put the doors in the car, and this is gonna allow us to really fine tune and adjust everything. Also, if we did that on the weld-on hinges and everything fits, okay, that's good. What's to say you don't put a bunch of weight in the door and it tries to sag a little bit? What's to say 5 years down the road, the hinges start sagging a little bit more? I mean, yeah, you could keep putting rebuild kits in them, but it's a lot easier to be able to have the ability to adjust the hinges. So I think for what the owner wants on this car, putting a new backing plate and just building something, you'll see how we're gonna do it to make it slightly adjustable, just like any of the early model Novas that makes things easier to work on, is the way to go. So stay tuned for this video. We're gonna have to grind, cut these hinges out. We're gonna have to trace, mark, and then we're gonna build a backing plate. I'll show you how we're gonna do it. I got some ideas. So stay tuned. Let's get to some work, and this should be a pretty short video just on the doors. At the end of it, we should have the brand new aftermarket doors put on the car, and we'll see how they look in relation to the quarter panels on their first fitment. So stay tuned.
So the first step on this Nova build is going to be to grind out these factory hinges. As you can see, they are welded on really good. There's a stitch weld around the whole perimeter of them, and then there's two on each level, big rosette spot weld just kind of gobbed in there with as much weld as they could. Obviously the factory was just throwing these things on there, get them on, make sure you don't ever have to, they're not going to come off. So like I said, removing them is a little bit more of a challenge. We'll go over on the other side how I went about in more detail removing them, but the first step on this side was to remove the hinges, and then what we're going to have to do in the top. The top needs an access port for the backing plate because we can't get the backing plate through the little opening in the top area. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut out both of the door jamb areas. I've done this too to actually fix some of these backing plates that are so rusted out that we can't get to them in the car, that you can sit there and cut the door jamb area, pull the backing plate out, and just repair it and put it back in. But we're going to cut this to give us access to slide our backing plate in. So on this side, the passenger side, we'll go through this in a little more detail. The first step, what I ended up doing was actually cutting the old hinge brackets completely off that's holding the door. This is going to allow me access to the hinge itself and where all the spot welds are. So once I finish cutting both the top and bottom door hinge brackets off, like I said earlier, there's rosette welds going around the perimeter of this Nova. I'm going to go ahead and slice down into those rosette welds. What else I'm doing is putting a cut mark where those welds are, basically tracing out the hinges for our reference point on our new hinges. If we don't do this, we're just throwing these new hinges at it blind. So the old hinges from the factory should be pretty close. Saying that, usually the new hinges don't exactly match up. So this is only a reference point and it should get us close, but I don't feel that these hinges are going to just bolt right on, go together, and thrown in there. Sometimes I'm surprised, but usually we plan for the worst and go from there. So as you could see, once we're done with that, we did cut the other side channel out of the top. The bottom doesn't need this area cut out because we can get the whole backing plate in this open access panel and drop it actually down above it. But what I'm going to do, well, now we have to come through the back side and actually grind out the factory rosette welds. We don't want bolts. We want a very smooth area for a backing plate to slide back and forth. This is going to make door adjustment a lot easier. So a lot of this, just got to prep everything, get it all going before we can do the work. So we're almost at a point right now where everything's flat, everything's ready to accept the new hinges and the new backing plate. To start that process, what we're going to end up doing, we're going to unbox our hinges. We're going to make sure we have the right side married to the right side of the car. I'm actually holding the hinges up to my cut marks where I traced out the old hinges. Like I said, this should get us pretty close. I got the top and bottom. You can actually kind of see the marks if you look really close where the hinges are going to go, and I'm simply just punching out the center with a marker. I'm tracing out the center where our new hinges are going to go. Once I get my center holes traced out, I have this little piece that I pulled off, actually a Mopar door jamb adjustment piece that was left over and was going in the scrap pile off a car that was rusted out. So we can use this, trace out our factory style holes for our door adjustment. If you don't have this, just a 1" by 1" box, something like that, something that looks good and you have enough adjustment to go back and forth. What you could do if you really want to be high speed is just put two holes in there and see where that puts your door. If you hold it up to it, put the bolts in it, someone's helping you adjust it. I'm hoping that these are going to be pretty close. We're going to wing it. If we have to, we'll weld up the holes, grind out new ones side of them. It's not the end of the world. So what I'm going to do after that, we're going to cut out our boxes with the plasma cutter. By far, if you have a plasma cutter, this is the easiest time to use them. It's going to give you the cleanest cut on a box without messing anything up. We're going to take our deburring tool and we'll come back through and just clean up our boxes again, just to get all the rough edges off. We want these doors to be adjustable and smooth adjusting. That's why we're prepping the back of it. That's why we're grinding out any sharp edges. So everything's geared more towards that. Once we end up with our actual mounts on the door jamb itself, we're going to come back through now and we're going to start making our backing plate. So this is a trial and error thing. We're going to make it out of cardboard. You can see I'm trimming it down. There are some areas in the back of this Nova where you can't just make a huge backing plate and you have to kind of offset it a little bit. So you're going to run into certain parts. So the cardboard really helps getting an idea where we're sitting, how far we're trying to adjust. The bottom one, you have a little bit more play than the top one. And you could see with the top one how it slides in there. That's the idea what I was saying, since we can't come in from the back side. That's why we cut that door jamb area out. So what I'm doing right now, we got 1/4" plate. This is going to be plenty for the backing plate on the Nova, and it matches what would be on a factory style backing plate. So I traced it out, our cardboard, our backing plates, and you can see I'm going to use just a cutoff wheel to just cut it out. I'm using the cutoff wheel because to me, it just gives a cleaner edge than anything else. It's less I have to prep. Yes, we could rip it down with the plasma cutter. There's so many tools that we can do to even get a straight edge, but then there's just so much more prep. So even with the 1/4 inch, for me, it's easier to just take the cutoff wheel and just slice it right down. Once I have all my backing plates cut off, what I'm going to do now, we need to put where our nuts our welded nuts are going to go on these backing plates, because you're going to screw a bolt in the front. We don't want to have to hold a nut on the backside to try to stop it from spinning. So what I'm doing, I'm just again marking my center holes where my hinge are. I'm actually labeling them in case the hinges aren't produced exactly the same. So I know I'm marking the same marks on the top and everything else, and then I know where my center holes are going to be drilled for the hinges. So once I'm done marking all that, we'll go to the drill press. This again is going to be the easiest way, if you have one of these, to just put all these holes. You know, you're looking at 16 holes in all these brackets, and we want them to go down straight. The drill press really does do a good job. It doesn't eat blades, and you could see it's easier to lubricate the drill bit so it doesn't wear out and dull out quickly doing the job. So once we end up, we're going to just drill all these the same. Looking at it now and, you know, looking back, most of these hinges, the bolts were exactly in about the same spot. So I don't think actually marking each hinge is exact necessity. However, it did make me feel better doing that and knowing that each hinge has its own special backing plate, and everything just did fit a little bit better. We did have to do a little bit of deburring, because even with the drill press clamped in there, the offset and my mark holes where I started was just so slightly. So saying that, you could also pre-drill a hole in your hinges to start out exactly where your bit's gonna go. That's another idea to maybe next time make it a little bit better. But you could see the little bit that hole was slightly off, I just took a deburrer tool again and just went through it once the bolts are in there. And the idea is you want the bolts to go in and out and really, one, not have a lot of play and not have to fight the bracket, because don't forget, you're going to be putting bolts from the front side. You don't want to have to be able to come back and someone else and you're trying to twist the door. We don't want anything in a bind. We want these to go together really comfortably. So what I'm doing right now, I'm assembling my bolts through the front side like you would bolt on the door onto the car, and then on the back side where you can't see, I put the backing nuts on there. So also saying that, I went with a 3/8 inch bolt and nut situation. So thinking back now, I didn't realize that the owner had the actual factory bolt door kit for the door. So I would have, if I had to redo this again, used a factory bolt kit for the hinge side to door jamb area, and that would have been, I believe it was a 5/16 bolt. So that would have been, you know, a 1/2 inch socket versus the 9/16. Obviously these bolts are stronger, but the Nova doors weigh so little. This is overkill. So, and it would have matched the bolts going into the side jamb area. So lesson learned here, I was in autopilot mode, just taking some bolts off the shelf and putting them on there. They're going to look good. They're going to function just fine. But if you're doing this and you have the Nova door bolt kit, just go ahead and find some nuts for those and you're good to go. Everything will match. So we're going to go ahead and assemble the hinges on the door pillars themselves first. So the reason I'm going to do this is just because it's easier for me to prep my backing plate, and when I get Megan to help me install the doors themselves, then we can just put them on the hinges and we don't got to mess with the backing plates. If you want to be really high speed, and I'm not right now, you can actually build some brackets in the back that like a cage, like a factory backing plate cage to hold in the backing plate on its adjustment. I'm not doing that, honestly. We just want to get the backing plates in there. I know that we could just, someone can reach around and push in the backing plate and it's just fine. I I don't want to waste the owner's money building some intricate design that's going to be covered by a kick panel and no one's ever going to see, and then it functions exactly the same. Again, once these hinges are bolted on the car and actually the doors are on the car, there's no reason to, you could still loosen the nuts up, adjust the hinges, and everything works just fine. Same thing on this side. We're going to go ahead and preload the hinges on the door jamb. You could see this is a good time now. What we're going to do, make sure everything fits, make sure we got our adjustment front to back, and we might have to fine tune our bracket if we're hitting anywhere that we missed on our cardboard. That did happen where I had to cut a couple corners off, move it to one side to get the full amount of adjustment. You could see how the top hinge slides in that door jamb piece. Once we end up and we get these hinges on there, again, we're going to attack the door jamb, make sure the backing plate doesn't get away in the way of the tacking of the door jamb. Then we'll go ahead and weld that door jamb up. Once we end up welding, you saw on this side, we did the inner structure first, for the support bracket area. Then I pulled the hinges off because they're going to get in the way once we end up tacking this area up. But then we got to do the outer skin too. I also put weld through primer in between all the parts. You could see when we cut it apart initially, there was no weld through primer and there was a lot of rust in there. So this is another area that now on this Nova, we're able to access that we weren't able to in the sandblasting process. But I'm going to go ahead and just MIG weld all this stuff up, clean it up, and honestly, when it's all said and done, after body paint and even really after the metal work, you're not even going to be able to know we are in this door jamb area. But our backing plate is now stuck in that area. The bottom one, obviously, like I said, can be removed. So that's something the owners have to be aware of, since there is no cage area holding that backing plate. If he takes the doors off, let's say this car goes on a rotisserie, that backing plate will have to be removed. So what we're going to end up doing now, Megan is going to help me. We have our door hinges pre-placed on our door jamb. They're kind of centered about where they were, and they are loose enough that we can move them up and down. So we'll go ahead and bolt these doors, get them somewhat close, and then we're going to fine tune the hinges once everything's on there. So we'll get the bolts in there. You see, it makes it easier with a two-person job. I'm holding it up to the door. I'm more worried about the bottom. Actually, right now, what we're worried about is getting all the bolts in the hinges, make sure we have our adjustment, and we don't need to do anything else. So what I'm going to do, like I said, now that the bolts are in, we'll go ahead and just start fine tuning, moving the door around, and find out what needs to be done on this door. Because like I said, with aftermarket doors, aftermarket hinges, there's aftermarket quarters going on the car. The rockers are factory, but really there's a lot of parts on these cars, and when you start putting all these aftermarket parts together, there is some compromising here or there to just make them all match up and fit. And you'll see, we'll go over this Nova further down the build line on what we're doing on the rear end to help make everything fit, how we get everything on there. Right now, this video is mostly just for getting the doors on, getting the hinges adjustable, and giving us that leeway to make everything match up as best we can. Like I said, I'm really happy we did this. Looking back, it wasn't too much of a huge project, but really what you get out of it is really going to pay off. So now that we got the driver's side door fit up and everything for the most part coming up, I'm going to sit there and we'll take a closer look at the doors, and I'll show you what we're at and the differences on these doors.
All right, now that we got our hinges installed, our door in place, let me show you what we run into on both sides of the door and what we're looking at. So on the passenger side, the hinges lined up perfect. Actually, we got a good door gap here where we're looking. The bottom of the door, which we're worried about, is actually in line with the rocker, and it's straight across the whole bottom. That's what we're worried about initially at this phase. Obviously, the door isn't profiled. It does come in a little bit, but we can't profile it till we fix the top issue up here. So I've run into this on other vehicles with the whole top window assembly that's built into the door. I know we did a C10 recently and they were completely off, where we had to actually pop out the spot welds and fix all this area. But what we run into on the Nova, you could see the top door frame up here it's not in line with the rear window. So it's wide, it's perfect down here. It's actually hitting up here. And in this corner, we have about 1.5 inch gap, and it gets tight back down here. With this car going over it, I know that the rocker panel is factory, it didn't move. This whole door jamb is factory and it didn't move. There's no wiggle room in it. And the rear window, jam unit, the split area here, that's been welded in. That can't move. So this car, everything on this frame is right. I'm really confident in that. So we're gonna say the door is an issue. It happens all the time. Who's ever building these doors, they put them in a jig and they don't really care and they just weld them up where they go. It looks good till you put it on your car. So be aware that this is something you might have to do on your own. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna try to bend this whole door frame this way. Saying that, I tell all the owners, and you should do this the same, before this thing goes to paint, before you start spending all the time on the body work and everything else, make sure your windows fit. Make sure they roll up and down. The more you can test fit in this car, the less hassle you're gonna have, especially with these cars that this is actually the guide channel. There is some adjustment in it, but if this is way off and you have major issues, will be the time not to find out is in the body and paint phase. So let's go ahead. We're gonna clamp something up here to hold our piece from moving. We're gonna use this monkey on the stick. Let's see if we can get it to bend. So hopefully the vice grips will hold it there. And we'll go ahead and kind of crank on it a little bit. You can actually see it moving. We're not going to go too much. I want to go a little bit at a time. Let's see if we moved it. Now the door closes all the way. So let's go a little bit more, but like I said already, and we know now with the profile, the bottom has to come in a little bit. But again, I'm not worried about that. We moved it a little bit. Let's give it another pump or two. Like I said, we could go the other way, but it's better to go a little at a time. One more. Oh yeah, now, so obviously there's some spring back in this whole process, but if you look now, actually we might have to come back a little bit. We're tight up here, but see right there is lining up pretty good. We could probably, like I said, we're gonna play it around with the profile and adjustment, but that's how you bend the top of the door. Actually, that's pretty acceptable. We'll look at this a little bit closer and see what we got. I'm pretty happy. You can see now the door closes, we're not hitting anywhere, and that was one of the key things. So we'll fine tune it a little bit more. Let's go look at the other side. I'll show you what we got going on. All right, moving our attention on this side of the door. This one on the Nova fits so much better. It bolted right on. Now I will say the hinges had to be ground out up here. The whole door had to be moved forward past our initial final adjustment a little bit more on the original hinges. The door was just hitting the quarter panel. So no big deal. I just tied up the door to the top frame, pulled one hinge off at a time, moved it forward, and then put the hinges back on. That was easier than just pulling the whole door back off and doing that. So saying that, with whoever built this door frame assembly, you could see it's perfectly aligned across the whole top post, the frame of the car, matching the window and the door pillar coming down, the window jamb, everything straight there. The door jamb, once we move the hinges forward a little bit more, we got a nice tight gap and it really runs almost perfect. And then same thing, we're matched up in the front rocker, and then looking down the bottom, everything looks good there. So really there was a lot less work that had to be done on this side. We're still not gonna weld anything on because of this car, I still want to put the front end on. We got an aftermarket subframe assembly, drivetrain going in this car, so stay tuned for all that. We're going to end up doing that first. Then we're going to finish work on our way to the back. What I do like about these Novas versus a lot of other cars we do is with this rear window pillar here and how the quarters are designed where it comes in with the door jamb built into the quarter, you're kind of limited on where the door can go. On a lot of these other cars, you have a little bit more play in it, but putting the doors on the car in these Novas first, I think is kind of key in it and just making sure everything fits in its home. So hopefully you like this video. Hopefully it helps you out. Please go check out our Facebook page. We do a lot of other builds that we don't always film on there. You know, we got some cool stuff going on in the shop. That's Carthage Classic Cars. Please like, comment, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It really helps us out too. And if you feel like giving this holiday season, check out my buddy Eddie and his foundation, the Eddy Bear Foundation, where he helps kids in needs out. Like I said, if you're gonna send him stuff, please make sure they're brand new items, unopened, and not wrapped up so they can get them to the proper children that need them in a time of need. So again, hopefully this video helped you out. Hopefully if you have weld-on hinges and you're restoring your car and you want to upgrade, make everything dialed in a little better, that this is one option to go ahead and do it and how we did it. And like I said, I think it was well worth the time and effort we put into it, especially when this car gets to the body and paint phase and the owner wants to fine tune everything or issues down the road. And same thing with the body and paint phase. Now the owner can sit there if they're, you know, basing the car and they want to pull the doors off to clear coat, and there's different options now to paint the car where they can pull the doors off. If you're using the weld-on hinges, man, it makes it so much more challenging to go back through and keep the hinges and pop out pins on the car. So that's something else to think about, something else, another option to do. So again, I'm Rick from Carthage Classic Cars, and we'll see you on the next video.